From Calvary Church of Santa Ana, this is the Calvary Life Podcast, the show where we share stories, laugh together, and have discussions about faith, life, and God with people from Calvary Church. Here's your host, Eric Wakeling.
All right, welcome to another episode of the Calvary Life Podcast. I'm Eric Wakeling and very happy to have you joining us, and especially happy to have our guest today, Chuck Gustafson.
Yeah.
Yes. How you doing, Chuck?
Good. At least I think I'm good. I'm never quite sure anymore. No. It's like, I got my shoes on, but I'm just always waiting for another shoe to drop.
Well, that's true. Yeah. I have a shirt that says, okay, what's next?
Yes.
And it's just, that's what 2020 feels like, right?
It really does. It's been a, wild, almost to 1 year ago. I think that's when things just kind of start to unravel in my own personal life with some illnesses. At the end of August last year, day after my birthday, I went in for a colonoscopy, and I've had those before. And they've always cut a couple polyps out, and I always kind of figure, well, that's what happens on these things. And so went in for one, and a week later, we had our follow up. Like, what did they find? And to my shock, my wife and I were there and listened to the nurse practitioner, tell me that I had lymphoma. Now, I wasn't even sure what lymphoma was. You hear all these, leukemia, lymphoma, CLL, and this and things, and I didn't know exactly what that meant, except for that I had a tumor on my colon growing from the outside in, which is different than colon cancer, which grows from the inside out.
Okay.
So, so they told us that's what it was, and I didn't even know what that meant. But they said, well, here's a referral to a surgical oncologist. Somebody to cut the thing out,
right.
And, take out a foot of your colon or whatever was going to happen. And here's a, contact, a oncologist, a hematologist, oncologist. And so that's where the journey began. And I remember before we had our first meeting with the oncologist, I was thinking, is this like the beginning of the end for me? Is this going to, cut my life? Are they going to start cutting parts out of my colon? And the tumor was way up at the beginning of the colon. So were they going to cut the whole colon out? Or what's going to happen? Is it going to metastasize to my life? To other parts of my body? And this is just going to be like, cutting pieces out one at a time. And so when we had our first meeting with the hematologist, oncologist, he assured us that this is a very slow, the kind of leukemia, the kind of lymphoma I had, they did some genetic studies of it. It was a very slow-growing kind of cancer, but it was a lymphoma, which means your immune system is compromised. But he kind of reassured me that, I wasn't going to die of this. Well, hopefully he's true. What he didn't tell me is I may die of something else because my, immune system, being so, compromised. And so those first couple of months, just kind of like feeling, more settled with the news.
How were you? Because that was in August, right? You said
August, September, October. I was, kind of in this whirlwind of emotion. Like, what's, I've lived a very blessed, charmed life. I've never been, sick to any significant degree. You had a few colds, a few, flus, and a few thises and that's, but, never something like this. So this was like a real shock. I've been, physically healthy. I know you're doing, the triathlons, and when I was in my younger days, I was doing those mini triathlons.
Oh, awesome.
Never the full thing, but I was pretty good at it.
That's
During
great.
my 30s and mostly in my 30s,
Okay.
and I did my hour and a half marathon. I did my 4.5 hour century ride, and I was
Nice.
so I was
Yeah,
really
you're
really
fit. You're
really
feeling fit and
so I always
healthy.
had a sense of myself that hey, I'm pretty good here.
And that invincibility of youth also a little bit too, right?
Yes, yeah. I figured I'd lived to 87. I was backtracking on that. So well, maybe I'll live to 90. And just kind of setting my goals and trying to live well now so I could live to those age.
Right.
And then when this news hit me in September, October last year, it suddenly just jolted me. And I guess,
tell everybody like what you do for a living too, because
yeah, I'm a school psychologist.
Yeah.
I started in 1977, and I retired officially in 2013. But I actually love working in this school district. I love working with kids. So even though I've been retired for the last 7 years, I've actually worked, at least half to 3/4 to almost a full school year
Right.
for the last 7 years. And I worked today already this morning doing some case studies, some kids that we're doing all our evaluations virtual, which means reviewing records. So I'm not having to actually do face-to-face with students right now, which is, if and when that comes, I'm going to feel a little bit more uncomfortable with that. But right now, it kind of gives me structure. I like doing it. My wife is a few years younger. She is still hot and heavy working, and she loves the hunt and the bringing in new clients and things like that. So we're still working pretty.
Right.
We're workaholics type.
But also just in that sense that, and so you're the school psychologist, and then you've been a lay counselor here at Calvary and really helping us with our whole lay counseling program from your area of expertise.
Yeah.
And so it's always interesting because this is kind of for me sometimes when I come up to a moment of my own, maybe of a faith struggle or a doubt or something, and it's like, I'm a pastor. And then it's for you're coming up to this moment of how do I deal with this diagnosis and all of this, but you're a counselor, right? And so you've probably been used to helping people process this kind of stuff.
And, I think a lot of counselors, if you talk to them, they're much better counselors for other people than themselves. Sharing their feelings, is difficult for other people, but it's also very difficult for us.
Yeah.
And one of the things I've been doing all last year, I've, through my health insurance, I've had, virtual counselors, 2 meetings a week, once with a behavioral coach, once with a counselor. I have a social worker that calls me monthly to see how I'm doing. So I've had to kind of, live the life of a counselee.
Yes.
And that's interesting itself, just kind of like, and it's been good. It's been good for me because, I tend to not, not that I'm not an open person. I'm very open, but I don't tend to share, a lot what's going on with me. But maybe today will be different.
Well, we'll see.
Yeah, exactly.
So like you're dealing with this, like you're processing this whole lymphoma diagnosis, and you're starting to get some treatments and that. And then the world starts to have, the news starts to hit of there's something going on in China with this virus, and we don't understand this. And now you've sort of become like the Calvary Church, like COVID celebrity or something, right? Like, which is the real, like, kind of the story we really want to walk through. But that's like part of this is why you had already this with this lymphoma and how it was this your immunity's compromised.
And the good thing about this, if there's good to be had, is that, right away, both my wife and I really looked to God to be our strength. And, I remember in, September and October when we were in the worship service, when we sang, it was singing from a deeper level. When we prayed, it was from a deeper need. you could see me raise my hand, more of a cup. I need to receive than hands. There was, just those little gestures.
Yes.
I just noticed myself kind of, my faith took on a deeper reality in my life when I really, we all know we need God, but when you, at this kind of junction, when you really see right in front of you,
right,
your need for God right now, right here,
right,
it takes on it's palpable. You can feel it,
right.
And I think there was a lot more feeling in my faith, through the beginning of my lymphoma, and right all the way in and through, me being in the hospital.
Right. Okay. So let's walk through it step by step, if we could.
Yeah.
So the way the world was kind of hearing, started sort of January, we start hearing about there's this thing, right? In February, it's increasing a little more, but it feels very other. Like it's not really about us yet.
It's there. It's
Right.
in China. It's in a different state. It's in, housing projects where people live in tight compartments and they can't, it's not us people, privileged,
Right. Yeah. Here in Orange County, right?
Yeah, right.
It's like, it's a place that there's, we have a little protection from a lot of things.
Yes.
Okay. So then do you mind telling kind of the story of how you did actually get coronavirus?
Yeah. So my wife travels for work, and she was in Utah, March 3rd, 4th, somewhere in that range. And then she was there on a business trip. And then every year she goes up to Salt Lake City and she gathers with some people in her industry for a kind of for a ski trip.
Yeah.
And networking. When you're in business, it's all networking. Even if you're skiing, you're talking about, it's all relational. You don't have to talk about business per se, but 2 weeks later, hey, I was thinking of you last week, and I want to run this by you, and hey, so all these things happen, and my wife at night after skiing, they go to a local restaurant or club where they have music, and there's a doorman at the place, and the doorman checks your ID, gives you a good look over. Perhaps coughs in your face or coughs in his hand, whatever happened, but
touches your ID after he's touched everybody else's.
You touch your idea.
Yeah.
And out of that, that was on a Wednesday when my wife went to that one particular restaurant, and by Saturday night, she was beginning to feel tired. Usually at these conferences, they all go out late, really late. I'm in bed 3 hours by that time, but she's an extroverted, and more she's with people. She gets more and more energy. And so Saturday night, she, after dinner, she just turned in and went to bed, and next morning she wasn't feeling much better. So some people were skiing. She just hung around the hotel, and she was talking to some of her colleagues and things like that. And then by, I think it was Monday or Tuesday, she thought, gosh, this is this is going a little bit longer.
Yeah.
And then she got word that this particular doorman at this restaurant had tested positive.
Okay.
It was in the local newspaper. And back then, early March, you could not get a COVID test unless you were, I just came back from China, or, there's somebody in my household. You had to show them something. And I remember we drove out down 17th Street to the Orange County, it's an agency that does the testing.
Okay, like the health agency or something like that. Yeah.
And we sat in our car, and this lady came back out in her hazmat and stuck something in my wife's nose and said, "We'll give you a call in a couple of days." And sure enough, they called her in a couple of days and said, "Well, you're number 6 for Orange County."
Wow.
So it was kind of new in Orange County, and when we got that news, I was beginning just, on that following Friday, I just had a little little cough, dry cough, no fever.
Yeah.
The thing with the fever, let's measure. I don't know about that.
And you never had it, huh?
Never had the fever then.
Okay.
Okay, but so I went to my general, my pediatrician, not pediatrician, but my
just general physician,
physician, and had to go in the back door, and they escorted me into this empty room, and they stuck something in my nose, and in fact, that was on a Thursday. I don't think we ever did get the results of that test. They lost it or something.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was the weirdest thing. I think they finally found it like 2 weeks later.
Okay.
I don't know. So that following week, like the 15th, 16th of March, I was beginning to get a little bit of a fever. Not much. I run low. I'm usually like 97.7. Mm-hmm. So I was like, 98, 99.3,
okay.
100, 100.2. But never, over that week, I was just, my temperature was creeping up. And I was getting that little dry cough they talked about.
And this is when it was really like in the news-wise.
Yeah.
I mean, that March 15th is the first Sunday we did live stream.
Yeah.
So that I remember March 11th is like when the NBA shut down.
Right, yeah.
So like that's kind of when it was really peeking into the consciousness of everyone. Like, oh, now all of our lives feel feel different to us. For you, it's
it's much March different. 13th was a Friday, I believe. I was working at a school, and they said after Friday, we're shutting down the schools.
Right.
That following week, I was at home, and my fever, like I said, was slowly going up. By Thursday, it was 101, 102. Finally, on Saturday night, about 10 o'clock, it was like 104.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And I didn't really feel that sick. I mean, like, I had a fever, and I was, a couple nights I had the kind of the sweats at night, but I didn't think much of that.
Are you assuming you have coronavirus at this point, or you just think you're maybe sick?
I thought I had coronavirus, but I didn't know what that meant.
Yeah. What
does that mean? Is it like the flu? Is it like we weren't getting great information about what it means?
Yeah, there's a lot of sort of like talk then of very kind of undermining it, feeling talk. Like I remember even making jokes myself, like, oh, yeah, I can get this sickness. That means I can be off work for 2 weeks and not have to, but not actually feel anything. Yeah, it's like we had this kind of messed up.
Yeah. And so I think that was why I didn't want to go to the hospital, because, I was kind of thinking, well, I'm. Remember, that athlete I used to be.
Yeah,
and,
exactly.
Now I did have lymphoma, but I didn't think like, what does that mean to me? And so I, went into the hospital that night to the emergency room, and we were shocked. They let me go. They brought me into the emergency room, and they waved my wife goodbye. And that was the last I saw of my wife physically, for over 20 days. And, they started doing all their tests. Yeah. And, they brought in the portable x-ray machine, and I had the broken glass lungs. They were, I think.
What does that mean? Explain that a little bit.
Well, when you have pneumonia, when they take the X-ray, it all looks like, like white glass.
Okay.
And so where you have, the infection, the viral pneumonia, it looks all white. Okay. And in my lungs, all these areas were white. They did some blood work and found out actually my kidneys and liver were beginning to shut down. I was dehydrated. Yeah. But I didn't know how sick I was.
Right.
I thought, flu, a cold, and I guess people were dying of it, but I didn't think that was older people. Yeah. People who weren't healthy or whatever. Even though I'm a little older, although I don't know I'm older until I look at myself in the mirror. Oh my gosh, who's that guy? But
the lymphoma is a real thing.
The lymphoma is a real thing. Yeah. And so They put me in on an IV and start pumping me full of fluid to kind of get me more hydrated, and they end up bringing me upstairs to my own suite, my own room, and I was kind of locked in there for much of the 20 days, and it was really lonely in a hospital room. The nurse only comes in like twice a day. The doctor comes in for maybe once or twice a day for 3 minutes, and so you're spending a lot of time just kind of sitting there, waiting to get better or get worse. Yeah. And I wasn't getting better.
Right.
And there was no real treatment. Now, that medication remdesivir, so the doctor came up to me, the first or second day and said, well, we're doing a clinical trial on remdesivir.
Okay.
There's 3 groups. There's the 5-day group, the 10-day group, and then there's a placebo group, and we're going to randomize, see what group you are in, and I came back as the placebo group, which means I would get no treatment.
Right.
Not any of that treatment, at least. And they were trying the hydroxychlorophyll and stuff, and at that point, they didn't think it would, make me worse.
Okay, so they did give that to you?
They gave me that for a couple of days until I started having visual hallucinations.
Oh, okay.
I would look out there and I would see these slashes of color across my visual field, and I had it for a couple of days before I even mentioned it to the doctor. I thought it was like a kind of an interesting thing, but I didn't think it was a problem.
Right.
And as soon as I told the doctor, they took me off of that.
Okay.
And so I was on just early on there wasn't much they were giving me except for fluid. They put me on some antibiotics so I wouldn't get some other problems. But early on there wasn't really any treatment, and they were always kind of wondering, how much of this was the virus reacting to me, and how much was this lymphoma that me not fighting it. So they had like 4, 5, 6 doctors working with me, and all kind of shrugging their shoulders, and they really didn't know what to do about the whole situation. So
how are you feeling in the midst of that early part in the hospital? Because how are you feeling the sense of fear, or what's going on between you and God? What's going on in the midst of that?
I wasn't afraid or fear early on. I didn't think I was going to really die of it. I mean, not really. I thought, I'd struggle with it but get better. But after, the first week and not getting any better but getting worse, they were putting me, my oxygen levels began to go down.
Right.
Like I still have today I have a little oxygen meter that I put on just to kind of see what my oxygen level, and most of us who are healthy have, 97 to 100% oxygenated blood. And me just laying in bed, I was going down to 95, 94, 93, and my oxygen levels were going down. Okay. So they start putting a little tube of oxygen underneath my nose and give me some more oxygen. But then at night, I also have sleep apnea, which doesn't help. So they were trying to put a mask on me, and that was very uncomfortable. It would just leak air. It was just nothing they were doing was working. Okay. Yeah. And luckily I'm glad for iPhones because I could have FaceTime with my wife, and I think my brain was going a little foggy at that point too, and I think I was getting a little bit of brain numbness to some of the things that are going on. Right. And luckily, every time the doctor came in, I'd FaceTime my wife, and she's at home at her desk taking copious notes, asking questions, and so
that's good.
I really, my wife is a go-getter. Through this whole process, I've learned to appreciate my wife more and more and more. What she's able to do, for others, and in this case, especially for me. Yeah.
So your oxygen does keep going down, though, to the point where not just oxygen in the tube in your nose, but you end up needing to be intubated, right?
Yeah. Now, this was on March 31st. I had gone in that Saturday, March 21st.
Okay.
So I had been in there 10 days, and they were doing, CT scans and X-rays, and it was just getting more and more, looking bad. And
Okay.
I remember that last morning on the 31st, they brought me in to the CT scan and did some IV stuff on it, and I felt a little bit like a pin cushion. Every morning, the nurse would come in, and she would try to take blood. So they wake you up at 4:00 in the morning, and they stick you with a needle, which, after about 10 days of this, it was hurting more and more. It was getting old, and in my veins were beginning to just move around. So the nurse, the 4 a.m. nurse would wake me up with a sharp needle, but she couldn't get the needle in. So we'd have to wait 3 more hours for the 7 o'clock nurse who would do it. So I would get like 2 needles every day to getting blood to see what's going on with my blood work. And it was, like I said, it was going not the right direction.
Yeah.
So on that, that whatever day the 31st was, a Tuesday, I guess it is, and or Monday, they brought me down for a CT scan, and I guess I really didn't realize what was going to happen next, because the next thing I know, I was in ICU, and they were, incubating me.
Yeah.
And
so you're on that ventilator.
Could
you feel that, like them doing that?
Well, here's what they're supposed to do is they're supposed to give you propofol first.
Okay.
And then they do the muscle relaxants.
Okay.
Well, they must have not put enough propofol in it, because.
Is that like a pain? What is that like? Makes you sleepy?
Yeah. Sleepy.
Yeah.
You go under.
Okay.
And the muscle relaxant makes you not move. So. For they gave me the muscle relaxant first, and I just remember I was kind of agitated already.
Yeah.
And suddenly, I was trying to move my legs, and I couldn't move.
Oof.
And then I was trying to take a breath of air, and I couldn't breathe. Yeah. That's a little frightening.
Yeah, it's very frightening.
Many of us are claustrophobic anyway, but this is like the ultimate claustrophobic where you can't breathe. And next thing I know, I was out, and I was out, and I don't think I properly said goodbye to my wife. I didn't know what was going to happen next. I didn't ask enough questions.
Yeah. Well, and so then, and even Michelle, she's like feeling like, like my husband's dying, kind of like what's going on, right? I'm sure she was just freaking out at that point.
She was totally freaking out, and I guess the good news, bad news, just to keep herself busy, she was out doing some yard work, the couple of days before this, a couple of days before my, going in the ICU, and she was cutting down this one bush. I guess it's called, poison sumac, and she got a allergic reaction all over her arms. So instead of worrying about me, which she couldn't do anything about, she also took some time to kind of worry about herself. It was kind of it was a blessing in disguise.
Yeah, wow.
Because it was like nothing she could do about it. So, so that day I went. They put me under, and. And this is the part I didn't know until a day later, but you can't have visitors in the in the hospital.
In the hospital, all then.
Yeah. But I think because the doctor really liked my wife and loved our family.
She's quite winsome and persuasive, both.
Yes, and we would have I had pictures of my family on the walls, and I tried to.
Yeah.
I think we try to humanize myself a little bit to them.
That's good.
And so that's just a little shout out for those who go to the hospital.
Right.
Make sure have pictures of yourself and family. And so. They called my wife and let her know what was going on, and they said to her, if you come down here right now, you can say, goodbye to your husband. And that was the way it was expressed. It was basically, the chances of getting off the ventilator at that time were not great. I think, a lot of people die on the ventilator. Not, even though it's one of the things they did, it was like we don't know what else to do, and it helps you until your body can breathe on its own. So she just, she told me later she just came in there, and you can imagine the scene with all these things going down my throat. I had a kind of an IV in my neck, a PICC line for, stuff. And she was just holding my hand, and she said my hand was just like icy cold. And
goodness.
She was just, just talking to me for a couple hours and just was praying over me. And, I didn't have any awareness of what was going on. And I think you've heard this part of what happened was that sometime during that night, I think what they do is they increase or decrease the propofol to see what happens if you kind of respond or not. So I was more of a twilight thing, and that night, the first and only night I was on the ventilator, I had only thing I could call it was a vision from God. And the vision was of me in this enclosed room with our kind of like that picture we often have of what Jesus would look like, standing above me. And I wasn't me. I was kind of more like a child, and and Jesus was looking down onto me, and spoke to me in a way that I didn't hear a voice. I don't know if his lips actually moved, but it was conveyed to me that Chuck, I love you. And then he said, and you're not going to die of this. And I needed that.
Yeah.
Because I think it as I was getting closer to that day, I realized that maybe I wasn't going to kick this thing, and I know God can heal, but is He going to heal me? And where is He going to heal me? Here on earth or in heaven?
Right.
So having that reassurance has made a big difference in my life, has given me more confidence as I go through even other struggles today, with things going on in my life. But it was one of two miracles that happened that night. The other one is we have a friend, and I think you know who Joel is, and he was talking to Matt Doan, and the two of them were talking about me and sharing how I was put on the ventilator. And Joel said, I just feel led to pray for Chuck all night. And the story that was conveyed to us later that Joel did in fact pray for me all that night.
Wow.
And then he said, around 4:00 he felt God telling him, hey, enough of the praying for the healing. I want you to start praising because I've healed Chuck. And we didn't learn that part of the story until later on, but it kind of made almost perfect sense of what was happening with us at that moment, because I had gone in that morning and went that night, and then sometime in that morning, as they were kind of tweaking my medications, they felt like he's better. We can take him off the ventilator.
Just that very night.
That very night, that same night, and in that morning, and my wife tells a story, and I kind of half remember it. I like most of us, we all know where our cell phone is. I was having my cell phone, and I wasn't too coherent because I was trying to text my wife, about what had happened that evening.
Yeah.
And it was more gobbledygook than anything else. And so, she called back, the nurse's station, said, my wife. My husband is calling. Is trying to text me. What's happening? And and the story was shared how it had taken me off the ventilator, and that I was in fact trying to contact her, and so there was just kind of a vision, a miracle, and also going on at the same time. My family, my 2 kids and our whole family, train of people were praying for me.
Yes.
And my son David, was praying for me. He has a girlfriend, Abby. Her family was praying for me. Her family, extended family, was praying for me. Her friends of her family was praying for me.
Yep.
Different church groups were praying for me. Our church was praying for me. I probably had thousands of people, literally thousands of people praying for me. And, my wife, was telling the story to some of her colleagues, and, and they were praying for me. And, people we had met over the years on Facebook and other things we were conveying to them. So I was just bathed in prayer. And, when I finally did get home, my son brought in this big basket of just letters of people praying for me. In fact, there was one that was, that was written on March 31st, the night I went. It was specifically not knowing what was going on, just said, I'm just praying for you right here and now. And it just seemed all those coming together of God's people with God's will was incredibly, encouraging for me. And, I remember, as, just at night, after getting off the ventilator, I still, even though I was off the ventilator, I wasn't, perfect. I was still getting fevers, but I just remember, going on my cell phone and, going to YouTube and just, listening to praise music. I think Waymaker is my song.
Excellent.
And it has a way of, they could play a thing for 30 minutes and I would sing it for 30 minutes, just needing that encouragement and just knowing God it was in the process of healing me. I was getting better at that point. Every day, my fevers, I would get like 3 fevers a day.
Okay.
I would get a fever. They'd give me Tylenol. They'd pack me in ice.
Oh, gosh, that's the worst.
Yeah. And then, the fever would go away. And then a couple hours later, it started up again. Tylenol, pack me in ice. And that was happening for several days. And, I would be eating their hospital food. And that thing about not tasting, I had that definitely.
Okay.
I don't think the food, I couldn't eat anything in the hospital food. The only thing I would eat would be these protein, drinks that they would make of, fruit juices.
Okay.
They would, make a hamburger. I love hamburgers. It was like cardboard.
Oh.
They make French toast. It was thick cardboard. It was nothing.
Yeah.
I had lost, I think in probably in January, I was probably weighing like 185 or something like that. When I left, I was like 157.
Oh, wow.
I mean, I was just looking at my legs, and there was just holes in my leg where there used to be something that was just.
Right.
I looked like an old man, and I didn't shave during that time. I had a gray beard.
Oh, yeah.
Oh man, it was like, and my wife, when they finally did wheel me out, she didn't recognize me.
Oh, yeah.
It was like she had to look twice, and
because she'd only saw you that one time, really, right?
Yeah,
Other than,
yeah.
phone stuff.
Yeah, on the phone, but you really don't get the you get
the
this
full
picture. You don't get the
yes.
The rest of the picture, and I was looking terrible, and I had a skin rash all over my back. It looked like I had smallpox on my measles or something. I had all kinds of stuff on my back, and I was no shower for 20 days.
Right. Wow. So how long after that night where you were on the ventilator and prayer and that sense of God healing you, and then how many more days till you were actually then out of the hospital?
I think it was about a week later.
About a week later. Just continuing to recover.
What they do is they waited till I had 3 days of no fever.
Okay.
And so, I think it was on so that was on a Monday. I think that Friday I would, had like, I was getting less and less fever. I would have maybe one fever day, but then you start the clock over again.
Okay.
So finally, I think it was like on the Sunday or Saturday, I had a fever, but didn't have any fevers for 2 days. And so I think it was on that Wednesday, March 8th, I think they finally said, well, you can go home.
Wow. Go
home, and they did I still did a COVID test, and I tested positive after leaving because, the thing is about, the test, it picks up the viral matter whether it's dead or alive. It doesn't know if it's dead. Okay. So, most people, when they leave the hospital, on these kinds of things, they'll test positive until you've shed all the dead virus over, whatever that length of time is, 4 or 5 days, a week or 10 days. And so when I left the hospital, we isolated for another 7 days so we wouldn't impact other people.
Yeah, good. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just such a amazing and sort of horrible but also incredible adventure that God had you on.
It was. It's like usually you sign up for adventures, you pay money for adventures. This was a free volunteer adventure that I didn't volunteer for it.
Right.
I was assigned this thing, and of course it's damaged some things about myself. My lungs aren't perfect, and I think it's damaged maybe the invincibility, overconfidence that one has. But when you get a near-death experience, I think it does create probably it does create a post-traumatic stress disorder situation where there's for a couple of weeks, I 3 o'clock in the morning I'd be awake and I couldn't go back to sleep. And it's taken a while. I'm just now the last couple months do I get 7 or 8 hours of sleep.
Okay.
Because that's been difficult.
Yeah, I'm sure. And then even for your wife to have to deal with getting that phone call to say, hey, come in and say goodbye, like that's just too much for anybody to.
Yeah, that was like I said, she kind of thanked God for her allergic reaction to the bush because it helped her not focus in on just me, but herself, because it must have been, I don't know what it's like to be on the other side of seeing me in a bed with tubes all in me, feeling cold, looking dead.
Right.
Something breathing for me.
Right.
That's
rough.
Yeah.
But then at the same time, in the midst of it, you had a very, very deep, real sense of like the face and voice of Jesus ministering to you in the midst of that.
Yeah. And that was, I mean, this experience has drawn me and my wife closer to God. Not that we were distant from God, but there's a little bit more passion, a little bit more emotion, a little bit more just connectedness because of his experience, definitely. And since that time, I've been trying to get myself in physical shape, and I'd go for walks, and I would meet people in the neighborhood, and tell them, hey, I just came out of the hospital, and I start sharing my story. And this is about the time that the church had my wife and I come in, and we did a little video clip on this, and I have that on my phone, and I tell the people the story of it, and I say, can I share this a little this little clip with you? And I think there for a while, I'd say, without exaggeration, there was many days where I'd share that clip 3 times along with my own personal story, and then we'd go on. We shared it on Facebook. My wife even shared it with her company. Bank United, it was called back then, and not Bank United, but but she would share it with people, and so it was kind of shared all over the place. And I think, people, I shared it with people at work. People at work shared with other people. So I think the word got out that God, cares about his people, and that he seeks us to look to him in time of need, and that through prayer we have access to God, and that he hears us, he listens, and he answers. And I think that's my kind of my takeaway, that God listens to his people, and people in general too. I think God hears us.
Yes.
And hears the unbeliever that seeks him, and we definitely were seeking God, through this whole time, and even now, we're seeking God through the kinds of things that are still going on in my life.
Okay. Yeah. What do you think? What do you sort of wish people would understand, maybe even about their own mortality and eternity, and because as you were sort of had to come face to face with that, and then now you're just here and we're talking, and it's incredible.
I grew up in the church, and I remember when I was 5 years old, kneeling at my mom's bed, receiving Jesus as my Savior. So I've always known Jesus in my life. I don't know what it would be like not to have God in my life.
Yeah.
But I have gone to God many times in my life, and especially this last year, really was a, kind of a highlight, I guess, one way of looking at it, of really going to God. And so I would want people to realize that, God does love us, and that he wants us to seek him. And for me, not that he put this in my path so I would come to him closer, but it does have that result. Sometimes things in life happen. What are you going to do about it? Are you going to turn to God or turn away from God? And I think it's like an opportunity when God gives an event in your life. What are you going to do about it? And I guess there was never a question or doubt that I would turn to God, but because who else could I turn to? The medical doctors really didn't have anything. I mean, they were nice people, and they tried to do what they could do, but there was really, seemingly at that time, there was no real treatment that really worked. You just kind of let the virus run its course, and hopefully you didn't die before the virus. I guess the virus dies out over a period of time, but it can so destroy your body that you can end up dying, of a dead virus.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. I really just think back on that whole experience for you, and just trying to process that even just for myself.
Yeah.
And it's such a reminder that, it's like, because none of us are going to live forever, right? So I always struggle with healings, because it's like, Lord, what, even my own stories in my life of when I was healed of leukemia, and just like, okay, Lord, but like, it's sort of a why me or why then? And I know it's like, you're not going to live forever.
Yeah.
And I'm not either. But Lord, what are you calling me maybe like sort of to do with this moment, right?
Yeah. And, people have said, God must have something special for you. Well, and He does, but I think God has something special for all of us.
Yes. And,
it's good to be alive to do those things.
Yes.
But I was just thinking, the things that my wife and I do, we actively share our faith with the people that we come in contact with.
Yeah, you really do.
We encourage other, Christians in their faith. We're involved in some, a couple different, small groups, and
the Alpha Course.
Alpha Course. We've done that thing
from the get-go.
From the get-go, and we're still kind of thinking, we did the virtual Alpha.
Yeah.
And
we had a couple people get saved that didn't even go to our church and now are plugged in and vital.
That particular couple that I think we both know who it is, they were over our house on Monday night, and we just kind of are pouring in. I think we're finding ourselves pouring more into people and things.
I love that so
we
much.
I've done the pantry, several times, and I get really almost not manic, but I get really jazzed about doing that kind of thing, and and praying with people in that. I remember this one lady. I prayed that she would get a job, and a week or two later, she came back and said, "Chuck, I got a job." And I took her phone number down, and I gave her, I texted her my video. And so I made some connections on even the food pantry.
That's so
and I guess that's what it's all about, connections.
Yes.
Making connections with people, and, and it's, we have this thing around here, sharing our faith. And, and it just, you don't have to tell me.
Right.
It just comes.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe you have to remind us at times, and see the gosh, people do want to hear what's going on in our life, and that's what's amazing too, is that people have been, gracious to me to let me tell the story. I'm quite sure there's a few people, and they've told me, well, I'm not a Christian. And I said, well, that's fine. I just wanted to share that with you, and just. If it encourages you, if it doesn't, if it just makes you more angry towards God because of something else, well, so be it. But, events happen in people's lives. What are you going to do with it? Are you going to turn to God or turn away from God?
And at some level, every person that's listening to this has been given days ahead of them.
Yeah.
Whether you've needed to be healed of something to have those days ahead of you, or you just have them.
Yeah.
They're all given to you by God, and what will you do with them?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, I think when you get this sort of wake-up call or whatever it is, this shake-up of a moment like what you went through, it's sort of can make us, it kind of gives us a clarity of mind maybe that's different, but and purpose. But at the same time, we've all been given, these set of days before us that are unknown to all of us, and kind of what will we do for the kingdom, like in response.
Yeah.
And I love how you and your wife have just always, before all of this, you were already sharing your faith, and so this has just shored that up.
It just gives us a slant. It gives us a platform, and also, I think being a husband and being a father are, I think the two greatest roles I have. Being a school psychologist is a plus, of course. But I think those are my spiritual charges.
Amen.
And with my son David, I think this experience has grown his own faith. I've seen the impact in my own kids that Michelle and I have had together. And my son David, this summer he got an internship over at Trinity, working with the high school kids.
That's right. Yeah, I did know.
And he just, I think the experience that I had gone through, I think really has made a big difference in his life and has made him think, well, maybe I could be a pastor, or maybe I could be, working with young people or something. So, and with my daughter, I think it has strengthened her faith. I do have an older son from a previous marriage. He's not a Christian, and it goes over his head and through, but he loves me, and we tell him the story. We tell him about what Christ means to us in our life every time we see him, and I'm quite sure he gets he's good natured about it, but
mildly uncomfortable though.
And he pushes back and tells us about the dinosaurs and things like that. But you know how that goes.
Yes. Oh well, I mean, I love that you can. If God can use any of this in anyone's life like that, that's incredible.
Yes.
To see that. I was thinking even of how that moment of where you're like seeing Jesus there with you. Yeah. It makes me think of this blessing that I pray over this Aaronic benediction. I pray over the church every week, make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. Yeah. And to keep you. And it says, may the Lord bless you and keep you. That means to guard you, protect you. And so so much of that blessing was there in your life.
I'm certainly an answer to your prayer.
Absolutely.
My wife and I are always in the first 6 rows as you talk. So
that's right.
I guess
it's coming at you quick.
It coming at you quick, exactly.
But
I like that. I guess rituals that we have. Like closing ritual that we kind of and we make. I think you make it fresh every week. And,
I try to actually mean it when I say it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's not like you just, push play.
Exactly.
You're not pushing play on it.
Oh, that's good. That's good. Well, good. Any maybe just kind of closing thoughts you'd have for people of stuff that, you haven't got to share yet that you've sort of learned from this experience?
I be careful. I think the virus is real, enough that, people are, at, significant levels of risk, and
take it seriously.
Take it seriously. I know it's uncomfortable wearing a mask, and it's been politicized and things like that, but until we get a vaccine that really, really works at a high percentage, our world is, I don't want to say forever changed, but it's I feel like I want to say that. I'm hoping it is not forever changed, that we'll go back to 2019, but I don't know. I think we're going to have to adjust.
Right. That's what I think. Well, it won't. Hopefully it won't be 2020, but it also probably won't be 2019. Yeah. It's a whole different thing in the future, right? Yeah. Which will have some of 2020 is going to definitely have a mark upon the rest of our future at some level.
And I think out of this experience, I do feel more compassion for other people. I know a lot of people are lost their jobs, and but one of the things that we do, we have some apartments, and we have to collect rent, and a lot of times, I'm just saying, let's just hold off on the rent for this month, or to pay what you have, and that's I'm not gonna, it's hard to do, but it's easy to do. It's like you've been given, and so I find myself be more compassionate.
That's good.
So it's changed not that I wasn't compassionate before, but I think it's always at a deep. It's like the onion. You're going a little every season. You're going a little deeper, a little differently on things. And
this actually came up on another episode of this podcast. We talked about this word compassion because it means in the Latin, it means to suffer together, to suffer with, and so like if there's other people that have gone through stuff like this, like you have suffered with them, and so you have a different sense of compassion than somebody that's just trying to read about it or and wanting to have that, but at the same level, like that's a gift at some level, even though it's not a gift maybe you really wanted, but it is a gift at some level.
And
So,
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, good. And so I hope for everyone listening, just that you'd be encouraged by Chuck's story to believe that God has the power to heal.
He does.
And God's very present with you in the midst of the suffering and the hard moments as much as he is in the joyful ones. And that if we can have some of that compassion, if we can have some of that that fervor too for the gospel, to recognize that is like what's so vitally important for eternity in the midst of this crazy sort of divided, polarized time, that the gospel is the one thing that's not political for sure.
It's good news.
Yeah, it's absolutely good news. So thank
people
you.
need to hear that good news. Absolutely.
Yeah. Amen. So thanks, Chuck, for sharing your good news with us today.
Well, and thank you, Eric. I think back, many years ago when my wife and I were working with your dad down in Mexico.
That's right.
I remember.
I almost forgot about all that.
Yeah, and we've known of you and your family for many years, and just coming from that heritage, and I'm hoping that my life with my own kids, I could pass on that heritage that your parents have passed on to you. I think that would be one of my spiritual goals, and I think God brought it about.
Amen. It sounds like you are. It sounds like you are. Yeah. So it's a beautiful thing. Oh, good. Well, that'll be my prayer too. So that's good. I love that. Well, thank you for sharing, and thank you to all of you for listening to the Calvary Life Podcast.